Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Poems for People Who Hate Poetry. And today I'm going to be talking about William Blake's poem, The Clod and the Pebble. And I'm going to be it's a very short poem. You can see it here, actually. That's as long as it goes. It's a couple quick stanzas, and we're going to be talking about the poem itself and understanding it, doing a quick converse with verse. I think it's a very basic poem. I think you'll actually understand this one to a large degree on a first or second reading, although there's a lot that you can do with it because there's a lot of interesting symbology or symbols in there. And I'm going to do my best to talk about, with the Clod and Pebble in mind, about Dylan, Klebold, and Eric Harris, the ideological murderers of Columbine in 1999. And you'll see, I hope, why I'm doing this. I'll explain as we go, but that's the agenda for today. So first, let's do a quick reading of the Clod and the Pebble and see what we can come up with in terms of the meaning that William Blake is having with this. And just so you know, this is the third poem, if you count the introduction poem, of Songs of Experience, or Innocence and Experience. This is in the Songs of Experience. So it happens after, I can't remember the exact date, but I think it happens after the Reign of Terror in France and after all of the upheavals and the revolutions after 1789. And William Blake is in London, but of course he's experiencing all of this as a British person. He's experiencing all that's happening in the upheavals of time. And I think this is an important element of understanding Songs of Experience. So this is the Clod and the Pebble. And as I always do, I'm going to read it once through. And as you can see, again, it's very short. It's 1, 2, 3 short stanzas, but there's a lot going on in this little stanzas. Okay. The Clod and the Pebble. Love seeketh not itself to please, nor for itself hath any care, but for another gives its ease, and builds a heaven in hell's despair. So sung a little clod of clay, trodden with the cattle's feet. But a pebble of the brook warbled out these meters meet. Love seeketh only self to please, to bind another to its delight, joys in another's loss of ease, and builds a hell in heaven's despite. So I hope you can understand a little bit about why I'm doing that, why I'm looking at this poem with regard to the Columbine boys. Now, here's something like just a quick feel of this. I think you can see what's happening. Love seeketh, seeks, to say love seeks not itself to please. So remember, in this first stanza, we find out that this is the Clod of Clay talking. So the Clod of Clay is saying that, love seeks does not seek itself to please. So what kind of love is that? It's called a selfless love, right? It's not about the self. It's not about the person, the lover. It's about the other person, other people, my neighbor, whoever you want to talk about. This is kind of a Christian viewpoint of it. Love seek not itself to please, nor for itself hath any care, but for another gives its ease, and builds a heaven in hell's despair. So think about what that might mean coming from the Clod of Clay. He's trying to say this Clod of Clay. And think about also, it's going to help to think about the nature of a clod of clay. It's very malleable and you can move it, you can mold it into anything that you want. That's not irrelevant here. And so love seeks not itself to please. So it's doing this for other people. It doesn't care about its own needs as a clod of clay, and it's only for other people. And then, of course, whenever it sees any kind of misery, it wants to build a heaven in hell's despair. Now, I think we could talk about this when we talk about Dylan and Eric. about the idea of building a heaven in hell's despair. Because, of course, one aspect of that is how you understand and define heaven and how you understand and define hell. And I think there is psychologically a danger when you are out looking, like when your whole ideology is that there is this heaven and hell and that some people suffer in the hell. And even if you're in the selfless thing, aspect, that it's your job to create a heaven out of hell, what that might do and has done, and just read the journals of Mother Teresa, who was miserable, and she made everybody around her miserable. Because when you have that kind of philosophy, that kind of ideology imprinted on the clay of your soul, then what tends to happen is, not always, but a lot of times, you will see suffering everywhere, even where it doesn't necessarily happen. You will allow people to be more suffering because you won't be hard as a rock. So you're soft-hearted, you're kind, but then what happens is you allow these types of things to happen where they, there's a more hell than there actually is, because you need to build your heaven, right? So this is something that we see happening over and over again historically, and we see it in our own lives. I mean, just imagine if everything, is so painful about someone you love, and they're going through all this hard time. They're always suffering. Something's always bad is going on with them, and they're in this hell, and it's your duty, your responsibility to build a heaven for them. Well, you may allow them to do things that aren't actually in their best interest. And the same is true for you. You may, instead of taking responsibility and going out and making the world that you want to and working hard, you may say, well, why doesn't this type of thing happen to me, where someone tries to build a heaven in my hell's despair, because I'm in hell's despair? So that's the Clod of Clay philosophy. Now, it's not a coincidence that Blake is calling this a clod of clay, malleable. And then look at the actual imagery that he used. The clod of clay is trodden with the cattle's feet. Okay, so is this a good thing he's talking about? Is it a good thing to be, excuse me, a clod of clay? Is it a good thing by extension, excuse me, to be selfless in your love? Is that a good thing in the way that he's describing it? To not please yourself, to not have any care for yourself, to only give ease and help other people, and to build a heaven in hell's despair? Is that a good thing in this philosophy of William Blake in this poem? I don't know. I don't think so, because why would it be a good thing to be trodden with the cattle's feet? He's not giving a value judgment necessarily in terms of saying it's not a good thing, but he's definitely drawing, this idea that it's malleable, that you're going to be trodden on, that you're going to be a doormat if you have this kind of selfless love. Okay, now we're going to get the contrasting viewpoint of the pebble. So now the pebble is going to sing its song. Now, again, think about what a pebble is. A pebble is a rock. It's hard. So think stone-hearted, right? So sung a little clod of clay, trodden with the cattle's feet, but a pebble of the brook warbled out these meters meet. Love seeketh only self to please, to bind another to its delight, joys in another's loss of ease, and builds a hell in heaven's despite. So look, we have, and builds a heaven in hell's despair, and builds a hell in heaven's despite. And it's not a coincidence that he's using those kinds of analogies, and he's building that together. You have the clod of clay wants to build a heaven in hell's despair. So hell brings out despair. He's going to see despair everywhere. And what the selfish person, which is the pebble, who is all about seeking only to please himself. He's only about binding another to its delight. So finding pleasure at the expense of another person or another creature. It joys, it finds joy in another's loss of ease, and then builds a hell in heaven's despite. So even if there's not a reason to have a hell, this pebble will create a hell. And part of that, I think, is the stone-hearted idea here. Okay, so that's a very simple analysis. I think that there's not that much more to the clod and the pebble. So if you wanted to stick around, I'm gonna read a couple quotes if you wanted to, from Dylan Klebold and Eric Harris. If you wanted to, I just uploaded a 2-hour kind of a quote unquote lecture on Jordan Peterson's book, 12 Rules for Life, Rule 6, which is put your house in perfect order before you criticize the world, where he talks about the killers in Columbine, Carl Panzram, the serial killer. He talks about the who else does he talk? He talks about several of the school shooters, quote unquote school shooters. And in that podcast, I talk about how calling them school shooters is not appropriate. They're not simply school shooters. School shooters have existed since guns and schools. And this is a fundamentally different thing that's occurring. And it really started in 1999, although there were a few, I think, before that, but April 20th, 99, when I was an 8th grader. I remember this very vividly when this happened. I was an 8th grader, and this started a whole new trend that is fundamentally different than just a school shooter. That's not appropriate to call them school shooters. In the podcast that I just did on Rule 6 of Jordan Peterson's book, I analogize or compare them with Islamic terrorists, with Nazis, and with anybody who creates their own subjective ideology and acts it out. They have much more in common with terrorists than they do with school shooters. So check that out if you want to have a little bit more context. But I think for this, I wanted to talk a little bit about Dylan, particularly Dylan, but also Eric Harris. Those are the duo from the Columbine killings, and what they believed, and how this kind of came about, and how I saw it related to the Clod and the Pebble. So the poem I chose for Jordan Peterson's chapter 6 was the Clod and the Pebble for this reason, for Dylan and Klebold as the Clod and the Pebble, and the others that he talked about. The Newton killer, Adam Lanza, I talked about Isla Vista killer, Elliot Rodger, the gunman at theater, the Colorado theater gunman, and so on and so forth. So I hope you find that one interesting. I'm pretty proud of it in terms of some of the thoughts that I had. There's a lot of interesting statements I hope that you will get out of that, including an analysis and a huge disagreement with Jordan Peterson. So here we go into the some of the readings. I'm going to pull this up a little bit. Let me pop myself up a little higher here. So I'm going to have this, some quotes here from Dylan Klebold's journals. And I've read as much as I can get my hands on. I've read the writings of Dylan Klebold that we can get access to. He wrote an essay, a very well done essay from what I can tell. I haven't done like a thorough teacher analysis on it, but it seems pretty well done. And the essay he did that is on a website called acolumbinesite.com, I believe it is. And the essay that Dylan Klebold did in, I think, senior year was on Charles Manson, the murderer. And it's very interesting to read that and to read the short stories and just everything, to get as much in the minds, watch the videotapes that you can, to get in the minds of these people that you can. And it's important, I think, for us to understand, because we're identifying this phenomenon improperly. I'm saying it has more to do with this Clod and Pebble issue than it does with school shooters. Now, so here's the first quote I'm going to read. So remember what we're talking about when we're talking about the Clod and the Pebble is William Blake has given you two images, two symbols, two images, two things in the world that are related to a particular idea that we all have. And this is the phenomenon of selfless love versus selfish love. So we have the love of the Clod of Clay, which is all about you at my expense, versus the type of love, the selfish love of the Pebble, which is all about me at your expense. These are the two things we're talking about. But it's very important. I really want you to look at the whole, the WHOLE of all of these things, because of all of these, of all the imagery in here, because it's not irrelevant. that we're talking about trodden with cattle's feet, building a heaven in hell's despair, because this is only a basic symbol. It's not an all-encompassing philosophy. I'm not trying to make more out of the clod and pebble than it is. I'm using the clod and the pebble as a starting point to think about some of the things that we have in our culture, including these school shooters or ideologically motivated murderers, or terrorists. So here we go. Here's a quote from Dylan. There's a lot of amazing, interesting, crazy stuff in here, and it's interesting to get into their heads. So, the most miserable existence in the history of time. Let's sum up my life. The most miserable existence in the history of time. My best friend has ditched me forever, lost in bettering himself and having / enjoying / taking for granted his love. I've never known this. Not 100 times near this. They look at me, slashed out someone's name, like I'm a stranger. I helped them both out through life. I helped them both out through life, and they left me in the abyss of suffering when I gave them the boost out. I did something for them. I was selflessly in love for them. They gave me nothing. They left me in hell. This is my punishment. What did I do wrong? The one who I thought was my true love, name crossed out here, is not. Just a shell of what I want the most. The meanest trick was played on me, a fake love. She in reality doesn't give a good fuck about me. And then it goes on like that. He talks about, and this is important actually too, doesn't even know me. I have no happiness, no ambitions, no friends, and no love. And then he goes on how he wants to commit suicide. Now, the next quote. So one thing I want you to notice about that is how, and this is repeated over and over and over again in the letters, in the journals here, is this idea that he did stuff for other people and they did nothing for him, that he is in this infinite abyss of suffering. This is Dylan Klebold, who is identified of the duo, Dylan and Eric. Dylan is the identified or categorized by psychologists as the depressive one. He's the one who is very depressed. In his journals, the most used word in his journal is love. He's always talking about how he wants love. He doesn't get enough love. Nobody loves him. And he's sad about that. I wish I could die right now. I want it all to be over. He talks about that. And, so Dylan has baffled people more than Eric Harris for a variety of reasons, although I'm not all that baffled by it. But maybe I'm just not mired in the 50 whole years of psychology. Like, that's a long time. I mean, philosophy has been around for thousands of years. We're developing philosophy for thousands of years, and psychology is like 100 years old. Like, get over yourself. Psychology is not everything, although it's interesting and I enjoy it. Okay, so here's the second quote. And the reason I say that is because we're looking at the ideas that Dylan Klebold had. My argument is that what's much more relevant to what motivated and caused all of these ideologically motivated murders is not simply that he's a depressive who got hijacked by a psychopath. And Eric Harris, I'll read a quote in a little bit, is a psychopath. He is a legitimate psychopath. And I'm not denying that that's true. What I'm saying is that the more fundamental motive, that motive means the reason for doing something, is the actual ideas and the way that they held those ideas. Their metaphysics, their epistemology, their ethics, that they had a fundamental view of reality and they acted on it. That's really the big difference between, and that's really a big difference between ideas and the psychology. The psychology may have helped to mold them in a certain way that they would act out these crazy ideas, because a lot of us may have crazy ideas, but we don't act them out in the way that they did. So that's another discussion. So here's the second quote. So the first quote I wanted you to understand was about how everything is about them, how they didn't do it, how they left him, so he lost his best friend. And, Dylan helped them out. He got them out of the abyss of hell where they were all suicidal. And now that his best friend has a love, they're just going to leave him behind. So it's kind of, they owe him. Oh, before I read the second quote, I wanted to read this from James Taggart, the arch villain, essentially, or one of the arch villains in Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged. And I think this is just, the more I expand my knowledge and studies of history and literature and philosophy, the more I see that Ayn Rand really is greater than even I thought. Here's what James Taggart says at one point. It's your sin if I suffer. That's exactly like Dylan. That's a Dylan statement. If Dylan were to have a more, older, experienced and more trained in writing and thinking even a little bit, right? So it's your sin if I suffer. It's your moral failure, right? What does Dylan say here? I helped them both out through life, and they left me in the abyss of suffering when I gave them the boost out. It's your fault, is what they're saying. They're both saying it's your fault. I have nothing to do with it. Can't I just be happy? I want to be happy, and I can't be, and it's your damn fault. Like, this is so prevalent in our culture. This is the Clod thought, the Clod thinking. It's your fault. So, this is the next thing that happens to the Clod if the Clod never finds any kind of personal joy by enacting its philosophy of selflessness. The only conclusion is that, well, to hell with you. What the hell did I do to not get love? I've been doing everything right, and you're not giving me the love that I deserve. Okay, it's your sin if I suffer. It's your moral failure. I'm your brother, therefore I'm your responsibility. But you failed to supply my wants, therefore you're guilty. That's the exact conclusion of Dylan Klebold. And this is what led him down to the road of murder and suicide. Okay, quote 2 from Dylan Klebold. I'll give the phony shit up in a second. And he's talking about, I think minutia pleasures of the moment. I want true love. I just want something I can never have. I want pure bliss, to be cuddling with this girl that's crossed out, who I think I love deeper than ever. And I'm going to skip some stuff here. I should feel happy. This is what happens to the Clod, Mother Teresa. You would think you would feel happy because you are doing the right thing on the moral system you've been taught. If I'm selfless, shouldn't I be happy? If I sacrifice for you, why don't you sacrifice for me? Like, that's a very, logical statement. That's what Dylan Klebold is pissed off about. By the way, it is not a coincidence that Littleton, Colorado is an extraordinarily Christian city. And it's a small town, so it doesn't have nearly the amount of influences from outside. And most of the people in that society, in that town, were very, very, very religious. That's not a coincidence. That's the problem. Because he is trying to act out. He even talks about morally cleansing himself. He talks about trying to get rid of pornography and trying not to pick on people and to be a good person. Good person on what standard? On the Christian standard. And he's failing on that. And that's, so he's like the outcast that's thrown out of all this because he's not happy. But shit brought me down. I feel terrible. Okay, let me skip a little bit. Lucky bastard gets a perfect soulmate. He's talking about his friend who he can admit fucking suicide to. And I get rejected for being honest about fucking hate for jocks from the wrong people, blah, blah, blah. He goes up. He goes down a little bit lower. They can love. Why can't I? So again, we get this theme, and this is not a flushed out, well done theme by him. He's a young kid, but he's not a dummy. He's a smart kid, and he's developing, he's not developing his own philosophy. He's grabbing ideas from the culture, and he's vomiting them out in a very irrational way. And then he's building his own viewpoints on everything. I mean, this is not a coincidence. He is a Clod. He is 100% a Clod in this statement here. Here's another quote. I wanted to love. I wanted to be happy and ambitious and free and nice and good and ignorant. Everyone abandoned me. I have small, stupid pleasures, my so-called hobbies and doings. Those are all that's left for me. Blah, 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 blah. Nobody will help me. only exist with me if it suits them. I help them. Why can't they help me? Will get me someone will this is crossed out for protecting the person. X will get me a gun. I'll go on my killing spree against anyone I want. That's Dylan Klebold. Now, I mean, I hope that scares you, but that is the philosophy of the Clod, especially the Clod who takes the idea seriously, which Dylan Klebold took his ideas seriously. And the logical progression of selflessness is if I'm sacrificing for you, and then I should expect sacrifice in return. Now that may seem, oh, that's irrational. You should do it for yourself. That's fine. But the reality is how it manifests itself in a human being. If a human is a Clod and they're sitting around looking at everyone else having happiness and joy and having sex and, you know, dating and doing all these great things that this person wants, which Dylan and Eric both talk about a lot, then that is going to cause them to, you know, burst out with some kind of hatred. Now, there are other factors that led them to do the murders, but what I'm trying to get at is that there was a motive for this in the same way that if you read Muhammad Qutb, I can never pronounce his last name, Qotb, if you read the Muslim Brotherhood, if you read the motivations behind it, it's a fundamental hatred for this culture that's different than theirs, that has, you know, women who don't wear burqas. And they just like Dylan and Eric have established this idea. And the same thing with the Nazis. The Nazis had an Aryan race. It was them. They were it was them versus you. And then if you weren't part of them, if you don't convert to Islam, then if you don't go under the banner of Islam, then you have to be destroyed. And that's the same logical conclusion. This is a selfless love. Really, it's more than selfless love. There's something else going on, which I'll talk about in a second. Okay, so I think that's it. There's a lot of quotes in here from Dylan Klebold that we can talk about. He talks about existence is pure hell and pure heaven at the same time. I will never stop wondering. And, he goes into some symbology that you have to understand, Dylan-esque talk to know, which I'm not going to get into all of it. But the point is that, he saw pure heaven and pure hell as that's all existence is. It's like a mixture of both. In a similar way that you have the Clod and the Pebble. Now, the next thing I'm going to talk about here is Eric Harris. Now, I'm going to read one full section of Eric Harris. Eric Harris is a lot of people consider him the main instigator. I'm starting to question if that's true. I think there's a likelihood that there was an equality. There's an equality amongst the two of them, that it wasn't Eric Harris persuading and tricking or convincing Dylan Klebold. It was Eric Harris who was the man of action, the logistical mastermind, who put the ideas together and who had the idea to actually enact it more. Whereas Dylan reminds me more of the Elliot Rodger. If you listen to the manifestos of Elliot Rodger, the Isla Vista murderer, he was several years older. He was a depressive as well for years and years and years. And he, so if Dylan would have consistently gone down that road with the same ideology and the same, viewpoints, and, having been infected by this kind of enacting the murder scene that he has even when he's 16, 17 years old, I think it's a possibility that he could have become someone like that. I don't know. There's no way to know something like that, of course. So my point is that there's no way to know that Eric Harris is actually the main cause. It very well could be that Dylan Klebold motivated and inspired Eric Harris because Dylan was the philosopher poet. And so I think he had symbols. He was the one who did a lot of the drawings. He had, excuse me, grab a drink of water here. Okay, so my point is that I think they worked together on this. Okay, so here's Eric Harris. As part of the human race and having the great pleasure of being blessed with a brain, I can think. Humans can do whatever they want. There are no laws of nature that prevent humans from making choices, maybe from actually doing some of those choices, but not from making the choice. If a man chooses to speed while driving home one day, then it is his fault for whatever happens. If he crashes into a school bus full of kiddies and they all burn to death, it's his fault. It's only a tragedy if you think it is. And then it's only a tragedy in your own mind. So you shouldn't expect others to think that way also. I mean, I have to stop there. Where the hell do you think he got those ideas from? The idea that you construct your own reality. That's American pragmatism. That's William James. That's John Dewey. That's if you know anything about Immanuel Kant, that's Immanuel Kant. I have his book Critique of Pure Reason. That this is the idea that we live in. This idea that I construct reality as I see it. It's only a tragedy in my own individual mind. It's not necessarily a tragedy here. I mean, Eric Harris is smarter than he is logical in his implementation of this radical ideology. So this kid's 17 years old when he wrote this. He was 16 when he wrote this, I think. Maybe almost 17. So let me keep going. I know this may be hard to hear from these kids, but it's worth going into it and thinking a little bit about this radical ideology because it's still here. We're still getting something is wrong in our country. Okay, I lost my place on that. Maybe the bus. Okay. So you shouldn't expect others to think that way also. It could also be a miracle for another person. Maybe the bus stopped the car from plowing into a little old lady walking on the sidewalk. One could think it was a miracle that she wasn't hit. You see, anything and everything that happens in our world is just that, a happening. Anything else is relative to the observer, but yet we try to have a universal law or code of what is good and bad, and that just isn't fucking correct. I mean, this idea of relative to the observer, not having a universal code, do you think that 17-year-old Eric Harris invented that idea? He acted on an idea that he got from movies, from songs, from school in particular. He learned this and then acted it out. Why are we surprised? Why are we surprised that he acted out? He just had the ability to act out what's obvious. Whenever you say, oh, that's your opinion, it's my opinion, there's no such thing. If you've ever said that or heard anybody say that, that is what Eric is actually acting on. Because if it's true that there's no such thing as an objective reality, that there's just your opinions and your views and there's Fox News and their worldview, and there's CNN and their worldview, there's the right and the left, and there's the libertarian worldview, and there's no actual objective reality. I mean, excuse me, but then why is Eric wrong to do what he did? It's just his worldview. You don't have anything to fall back on. This is so important to understand what motivates these people, because where the hell do you think they got these ideas from? Okay, I'm getting off topic because it pisses me off. I cannot believe nobody is talking about the ideology of all of these ideologically driven school murderers. They're not school shooters. Okay, sorry. I'm getting off topic. But yet we have to try, we try to have a universal code or law or code of what is good and bad, and that just isn't fucking correct. We shouldn't be allowed to do that. We aren't gods. Just because we are at the top of the food chain with our technology doesn't mean we can be judges of nature. Sure, we can think what we want, but you can think and believe you can judge people in nature all you want, but you are still wrong. Why, and this is, but why should your morals apply to everyone else? Morale is just another word. He has I really recommend reading Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment. These characters, these individuals, Eric and Harrison, Raskolnikov and Crime and Punishment, are doing something very interesting and in a scary way. They are acting out the ideas that are prevalent in their own time. So Raskolnikov, throughout the story Crime and Punishment, gives reasons for his murder, that he murders this pawnbroker and I think the mother. He gives reasons throughout, and they're reasons that are dominant reasons in the 19th century, dominant philosophies of this kind of ideology coming out. I mean, this is Raskolnikov that I'm reading right now. It's crazy. And so I don't understand how people are. Morale is just another word. It's this Eric Harris, and that's it. I think we are all a waste of natural resources. It should be killed off. And since humans have the ability to choose, and I'm human, I think I will choose to kill and damage as much as nature allows me to take. So take that. Fuck you and eat napalm and lead. Ha! Only nature can stop me. He has made a god out of nature, just as the communists made a god out of the society, or Nazis made a god out of the Aryan race. I know I could get shot by a cop after this is Eric Harris, after only killing a single person, but hey, guess the fuck what? I choose to kill that one person. So get over it. It's my fault, not my parents, not my brothers, not my friends, not my favorite bands, not my computer games, not the media. It is mine. So go shut the fuck up. So, he's obviously angry, but he has a mashing of a whole bunch of ideologies in here. Now, Eric Harris I'm talking about here is the Pebble. Eric is the hard-hearted, Pebble that sings love seeketh only self to please. Eric Harris is a legitimate psychopath. He gets pleasure. He finds joy in another's loss of ease. He finds joy in pain. He's got his emotional mechanisms are reversed to bind another to its delight. That's what he wants. And his delight is the loss of another's ease and the pain of another person. And he wants to build a hell in heavens to spite. Now, as I've said, I'm not trying to overblow that the Clod of the Pebble is a philosophy for everything. What I'm trying to do with Poems People Who Hate Poetry is show you that analogy is a form of thinking, and that what we need to be focused on is how to think. And the Clod of the Pebble is William Blake trying to give you two images of to hold in your mind of an example of selfless love. So whenever you think about selfless love, think about the clod. So whenever someone says you shouldn't love, you should love thy neighbor, you should think, well, do I want to be a clod? Do I want to be malleable? Do I want to be trodden on by cattle's feet? Like, this is a way of thinking. And this is also a way of disagreeing. If you don't agree with that, then fine. Come up with your own analogies. So then the other one is the Pebble, of course, which is, to be hard-hearted. And so, I think William Blake is making a dichotomy that even he believes is a false dichotomy. I'm not an expert in William Blake as much as I've read him. I haven't read a lot of his longer pieces, so I assume he talks more about the transformation. He's big into the dragon transformation. So there might be more of that, of transforming into more than man, which, is I don't know enough about William Blake to know how that worked. I do know he developed his own religion, essentially, which is definitely not good. And Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold also created their own philosophy. Okay. So the last thing I was just going to say of the Clod and the Pebble is, I think the Pebble, the Clod, which is me, or it's me for you at my expense. It's me versus you, and then the Pebble is you versus me, and it's me doing something at your expense versus you doing something at my expense. But either way, I think I'm mixed up. But either way, it's a me versus you attitude, or you versus me attitude. However you want to figure out, it's two sides of the same coin. It's subjectivism. It's the idea that the subject, me, or you, is relevant. And the question then, if you believe in subjectivism, is who to sacrifice. Should I sacrifice myself to you or you to me? Now, the Dylan example that I was giving you and the Eric example that I was giving you is this idea that if you believe that, if you hold that, psychologically, the next step is that you might become angry, or you might, enshrine suffering, you might enshrine despair, you might enshrine hell, because it's a failing model. It has to fail over long term. It has to fail. If you're sacrificing yourself, because they're not going to sacrifice you. So if you hold up on a pedestal the idea of morally it's good to sacrifice yourself, this is bad, because you're going to find, like Dylan found, or it's very likely you'll find, like Dylan found, that you're not going to get sacrificed too. And then Dylan, went insane. There's other reasons he went insane, which I haven't talked about, but that is part of it. That the ideology he had is not irrelevant. It's part of the problem. So there's this irrational subjectivism of me versus you, or you versus me. It's two sides of the same coin. Ayn Rand posited a third option, which is rational egoism. And that is me for my own long term, but not at the expense of you. So it's I hold my own life, and I'm forgetting the quote. Actually, let me look this up real quick. John Galt quote. Oh, there we go. So this I think is I can find it. Oh, why didn't it pull up? I swear by my life and my love of it that I will never live for the sake of another man, nor ask another man to live for mine. So that's the idea of rational self-interest, is that it's not that I'm going to live for you or that you're going to live for me. There's no clash. If I'm going to operate with you, it's going to be trade. I'm going to trade with you and you're going to trade with me, and that's it. It's not my duty, to fix every problem in the world or every sufferer in the world. If someone's suffering, that's they have to take care of it. Now, that doesn't mean you can't do charity. I know everyone always asks that, which is revealing of the pervasiveness of subjective selfless, irrational selflessness, is that everyone always asks, well, what about, is it bad to do that? No, what we're saying is irrational egoism is that it's not your moral duty to do that. If you choose to do it, great, but it's not. I'm not going to give you moral brownie points because you gave $100 more, or you gave your last $100, or you were hungry and you gave a piece of your pie to the next guy. You're not getting moral brownie points for that from me, or from Ayn Rand, or from any objectivists out there. So the point is that that what you need is to get rid of the subjectivism and to have objectivism, or to have the idea of me and you. And if we're going to work together, it's going to be a trading alliance where we're working for mutual benefit to mutual ends, that we both flourish together rather than me versus you. And so the conclusion I have here for you on the Clod and the Pebble is, don't be a clod, don't be a pebble. Instead, be the brook. Be the brook. And if you want to know what I think about that, you can ask me. But my concluding statement is, don't be the clod, don't be the pebble, be the brook or the stream. Thank you.